The morning sun cast long shadows across the desert floor as Ayana knelt by the stream, her reflection rippling in the clear water. At 17 summers, she was considered the most beautiful maiden in her Apache band, with eyes like polished obsidian and hair that flowed like a black waterfall down her back. The sacred white clay paint on her cheeks marked her as untouched, a virgin daughter of the wind. Her father, Cochise's trusted war chief Naalnish, had protected her carefully from the advances of young warriors. Today was different. Today, she felt the weight of destiny pressing against her chest like a stone. The distant sound of hoofbeats broke the morning silence, and Ayana's hand instinctively moved to the bone-handled knife at her waist. Through the cottonwood trees, she glimpsed a lone rider approaching the hidden camp. His horse was lathered with sweat, and even from this distance, she could see the exhaustion etched into his frame. Something about his posture spoke of desperation rather than threat. The rider wore the clothes of a white cowboy, but his movements held a strange reverence as he approached Apache territory. Ayana knew she should alert the sentries, but curiosity rooted her feet to the earth. Jake Morrison had been riding for 3 days straight, following the ancient trails that led deep into Apache lands. His calloused hands gripped the reins tighter as he recognized the sacred markers carved into the rock faces. At 28, he had learned enough Apache customs from his friend Tom Jeffords to know he was entering a world where one wrong move meant death. His blue eyes, weathered by years under the desert sun, held a determination that had carried him through countless hardships. The leather saddlebags behind him contained not weapons, but gifts, turquoise stones, silver jewelry, and fine blankets that represented his life's savings. The cowboy's presence had not gone unnoticed by the Apache scouts hidden among the rocks. Tarek, a young warrior eager to prove himself, fingered his rifle as he watched the white man's approach. His face bore the traditional war paint of his people, red and black stripes that marked him as one of Naalnish's most promising students. The morning breeze carried the scent of sage and pinyon pine as he waited for orders from his chief. Years of broken treaties and betrayals had taught the Apache to trust no white man, yet something about this rider's demeanor gave Tarek pause. In the heart of the camp, War Chief Naalnish sat in council with the elders, discussing the increasing pressure from the U.S. Army. His weathered face, marked by decades of warfare, showed the wisdom that had kept his people alive in an ever-changing world. The eagle feathers in his graying hair told the story of countless battles fought and won. Around him, the other chiefs nodded gravely as they spoke of dwindling hunting grounds and the white man's relentless march westward. The sound of approaching hoofbeats caused every warrior to reach for their weapons, but Naalnish raised a hand for patience. Jake Morrison rode into the Apache camp with his hands clearly visible, his hat removed in a gesture of respect. The silence that greeted him was heavier than the desert heat, broken only by the whisper of wind through the canyon walls. Children peered from behind their mothers' skirts, while warriors emerged from concealment like shadows given form. The cowboy's horse snorted nervously, sensing the tension that crackled through the air like lightning before a storm. Every eye in the camp followed his movements as he dismounted slowly, deliberately, his actions screaming of peaceful intentions. Ayana watched from behind a cluster of Apache women as the strange cowboy approached her father's lodge. Something in his bearing reminded her of the stories her grandmother told of the old days, when some white men could be trusted. His face, though marked by hardship, held an honesty that seemed to shine through the dust and exhaustion. She found herself stepping forward without conscious thought, drawn by an inexplicable pull toward this mysterious stranger. The other women whispered warnings, but Ayana felt as if she were walking in a vision sent by the spirits. The confrontation between Jake Morrison and War Chief Naalnish was like the meeting of two different worlds. The cowboy spoke in halting Apache, words he had learned from traders and scouts, his voice carrying a sincerity that transcended language barriers. He gestured toward his saddlebags, then toward Ayana, his intentions becoming clear with each carefully chosen word. The war chief's face remained impassive as stone, but his dark eyes flickered with something that might have been surprise. In broken English mixed with Apache phrases, a conversation began that would change the fate of everyone present. Young Tarak felt his blood boil as he realized what the white man was proposing. The cowboy wanted to claim Ayana as his bride, offering gifts and promises in exchange for the most precious daughter of their tribe. The warrior's hand moved toward his tomahawk, ready to end this insult with swift violence. But Nalnish's subtle gesture stayed his hand, and Tarak found himself watching a drama unfold that challenged everything he believed about the nature of their enemies. The morning sun climbed higher, casting sharp shadows that seemed to divide the camp between those who saw opportunity and those who saw only betrayal. As the sun reached its zenith, War Chief Nalnish made a decision that would echo through the canyons for generations to come. His voice carried the weight of ancient law as he spoke, and every warrior present understood that their chief was about to bind their fate to that of this lone cowboy. The gifts offered were substantial, but more important was the man's willingness to enter Apache territory alone and unarmed. Whether this would prove to be wisdom or folly remained to be seen, but as Ayana looked into Jake Morrison's blue eyes, she sensed that the spirits themselves had guided this moment. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test the bonds of love against the fury of war. The decision of War Chief Nalnish sent ripples of shock through the Apache camp like a stone thrown into still water. His weathered hands moved in ancient gestures as he spoke the binding words that would unite his daughter to the white cowboy. Ayana felt her heart racing like a wild mustang as she realized her fate was being decided without her voice. The sacred traditions of her people demanded obedience, yet something deep within her spirit sang with an unexpected joy. Jake Morrison stood straighter, understanding that he had been granted something beyond price, but also beyond his full comprehension. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders like a heavy blanket. Tarak's jaw clenched as he watched the ceremony unfold, his young warrior's pride burning like a fire in his chest. He had dreamed of claiming Ayana as his own bride, following the proper Apache customs and proving his worth in battle. Now this stranger, this white invader, had stolen away his future with gifts and strange words. The other young warriors shared his anger, their hands itching for their weapons as they witnessed what felt like the ultimate betrayal. Yet their respect for War Chief Nalnish held them in check, though barely. The tension in the camp grew thick enough to cut with a knife. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Jake Morrison found himself alone with Ayana by the sacred spring. Her English was better than his Apache, learned from the trading posts and the occasional missionary who had visited their territory. Their conversation was halting at first, two souls from different worlds trying to find common ground. She spoke of her dreams, of visions where she had seen a man with sky-colored eyes coming from the east. He told her of his ranch, of the valley where he had built a cabin with his own hands, dreaming of the day he might share it with someone special. The evening fire cast dancing shadows on their faces as they sat together, neither quite believing the strange turn their lives had taken. Ayana's grandmother, Istas, approached them with the wisdom of her 80 winters etched into every line of her face. She had lived through the great changes, had seen the coming of the horse soldiers and the building of the iron roads. Her words to Jake Morrison were spoken in the old tongue, but her meaning was clear in her eyes. He was being tested, not just as a husband, but as a bridge between two peoples who had known mostly war. The old woman's blessing would mean everything in the trials to come. Jake Morrison's hands trembled slightly as he presented Ayana with a silver bracelet, a family heirloom that had belonged to his mother. The delicate metalwork caught the firelight, but it was the gesture itself that moved the Apache maiden's heart. In her culture, Such gifts carried the weight of promises that extended beyond the individual to encompass entire families and clans. As she accepted the bracelet, she felt the cool metal against her skin, like a chain that bound her not only to this strange white man, but to a destiny she could barely imagine. The other women of the tribe watched in silence, some with approval, others with deep concern. The night brought whispered conversations and hushed debates throughout the Apache camp. The elders spoke of prophecies and signs, of visions that had foretold the coming of change. Some saw Jake Morrison's arrival as the fulfillment of ancient words spoken by their grandfathers' grandfathers. Others feared it was the beginning of the end, the first crack in the wall that would eventually bring down their way of life. Young Tarek moved among the warriors like a shadow, his words carefully chosen, but carrying the seeds of rebellion. The camp was dividing, and everyone could feel the tension building like storm clouds on the horizon. In the privacy of the war chief's lodge, Nalnish spoke with his daughter about the path that lay ahead. His voice carried the weight of generations as he explained the deeper meaning behind his decision to allow this union. The white soldiers were coming in ever greater numbers, and the old ways of fighting might no longer be enough to protect their people. Perhaps this marriage could build a bridge to peace, or at least buy them time to prepare for what was coming. Ayana listened with growing understanding, realizing that her personal happiness was secondary to the survival of her entire people. The burden of responsibility settled on her young shoulders like a sacred mantle. Jake Morrison spent the night in meditation, understanding that accepting Ayana as his bride was only the beginning of a much larger commitment. He had studied the Apache ways enough to know that marriage into the tribe meant more than just taking a wife. He would be expected to defend her people as fiercely as he would defend her, to honor their customs and perhaps even fight alongside their warriors. The blue-eyed cowboy had come seeking love, but he was discovering that love in Apache society came with obligations that extended far beyond the boundaries of his small ranch. The moon overhead seemed to watch his contemplation with ancient, knowing eyes. As dawn approached, the sacred ceremonies began that would bind Jake Morrison and Ayana in the eyes of the Apache gods. The war chief's medicine bundle was opened, revealing objects of power that had been passed down through countless generations. Sage smoke rose toward the morning sky as prayers were offered in the old tongue, words that carried the hopes and fears of an entire people. Ayana's hands were painted with symbols of fertility and protection, while Jake Morrison submitted to having his face marked with the signs of a warrior husband. The ceremony was beautiful and terrifying, marking the point of no return for both of them. The sun broke over the eastern peaks, just as the final words of binding were spoken, and Jake Morrison claimed his Apache bride with a kiss that sealed their fate. Some of the warriors cheered, caught up in the beauty of the moment, while others remained silent, their disapproval written in the hard lines of their faces. Ayana felt transformed, no longer the protected daughter, but now a woman whose choices would ripple through both the Apache world and the white world beyond. As the newlyweds prepared to leave for Jake Morrison's distant cabin, none of them could imagine the storm of violence that was already gathering on the horizon. The marriage that was meant to bring peace would soon be tested by war itself. The journey to Jake Morrison's cabin took 2 days through treacherous mountain passes and hidden valleys known only to the Apache. Ayana rode beside her new husband, her heart torn between excitement and a growing sense of foreboding that seemed to follow them like a shadow. Behind them, a small escort of warriors led by her cousin Nantan ensured their safe passage, but their faces remained grim and watchful. The landscape itself seemed to whisper warnings as they traveled deeper into territory that bordered the expanding white settlements. Every mile took Ayana further from everything she had ever known, yet closer to a destiny that felt both inevitable and terrifying. Jake Morrison's cabin sat in a pristine valley, where a clear stream meandered between stands of aspen and pine. He had chosen this location carefully, far enough from the nearest town to avoid unwanted attention, yet close enough to trading routes to make a living. The structure itself was solid and well built, with thick log walls that could withstand both harsh winters and potential attacks. As they approached, Ayana marveled at the neat garden, the sturdy corral, and the small touches that showed a man who took pride in creating a home. The sight filled her with unexpected hope that perhaps this strange union might actually work. The setting sun painted the entire valley in golden light, making it seem like a place touched by the spirits themselves. That first night in the cabin, Jake Morrison and Ayana sat by the fireplace, learning to be husband and wife in a world that belonged fully to neither of their peoples. Their conversation flowed more easily now, a mixture of English, Apache, and the universal language of two souls trying to understand each other. She told him about her childhood, about learning the ways of plants and healing from her grandmother. He spoke of his dreams for the valley, of raising cattle and perhaps even children who would bridge the gap between their worlds. Outside, the wind in the pines sounded almost like Apache chants, and for a moment the future seemed bright with possibility. Unknown to the newlyweds, Tarek had not accepted the marriage as final. 2 days after their departure, he slipped away from the Apache camp with 3 other young warriors who shared his fury at this betrayal of their people. Their faces were painted for war, and their hearts burned with the righteousness of those who believe they are fighting to preserve their way of life. The small war party moved like ghosts through the desert night, following the trail left by the wedding party with the skill of born hunters. Tarek's plan was simple: kill the white man and bring Ayana home, claiming her as his own in the chaos that would follow. The other warriors followed him with the blind faith of youth, not seeing the larger catastrophe their actions would unleash. Meanwhile, back at the main Apache camp, War Chief Nialnish awoke from a dream that left him cold with dread. In his vision, he had seen the valley where his daughter now lived, but it was bathed in blood and filled with the smoke of burning buildings. The old medicine man, Bidzi, interpreted the dream as a warning that the fragile peace they had tried to create was about to shatter like pottery dropped on stone. Runners were sent immediately to gather the scattered bands of Apache warriors, but Nalnish feared they might already be too late. The decision to allow his daughter's marriage had been meant to prevent war, but he now realized it might have done the exact opposite. On the morning of the 3rd day, Jake Morrison woke to find fresh horse tracks around his cabin that hadn't been there the night before. His years of frontier life had taught him to read sign like other men read books, and these tracks told a story of Apache warriors moving in the darkness. He said nothing to Ayana, not wanting to frighten her, but he quietly checked his weapons and made sure his ammunition was within easy reach. The feeling of being watched pressed against him like a physical weight, and he found himself glancing frequently toward the tree line, where shadows seemed to move with purpose. Something was coming, and every instinct he possessed screamed danger. That afternoon, while Ayana gathered herbs near the stream, Tarek and his warriors struck with the silence and fury of hunting cats. The young Apache warrior burst into the cabin expecting to find Jake Morrison unprepared, but the cowboy had survived too many dangerous situations to be caught completely off guard. The battle was fierce but brief, with Tarek's tomahawk clashing against Jake Morrison's rifle barrel in a deadly dance of steel and wood. The other warriors pressed their attack from multiple directions, but the cabin's thick walls and narrow windows gave the defender crucial advantages. The sound of gunfire echoed through the valley like thunder, sending birds fleeing from the trees in dark, panicked clouds. The fight ended when Jake Morrison's rifle spoke once more, and Tarek fell with a warrior's cry on his lips. The surviving Apache warriors, faced with their leader's death and running low on ammunition, melted back into the forest as quickly as they had appeared. Ayana returned to find her husband wounded, but alive, and her cousin's body cooling in the doorway of her new home. The sight of Tarek's lifeless eyes staring up at the sky filled her with a grief so profound, it seemed to tear her soul in half. She had lost not just a childhood friend, but any hope that her two worlds could ever truly be at peace. The blood on the cabin floor seemed to seal their fate in letters written in crimson. Word of Tarek's death spread through the Apache nation like wildfire, carried by the surviving warriors who painted Jake Morrison as a cold-blooded killer who had murdered their comrade in cold blood. The story grew with each telling, until the cowboy became a monster who had stolen their most precious maiden and slaughtered any who opposed him. War Chief Nalnish tried to counsel patience and wisdom, but the younger warriors were beyond listening to voices of moderation. They spoke of honor and revenge, of the need to wash away the insult to their people with the blood of enemies. The drums began to beat in the hidden canyons, calling the scattered bands to gather for war. As night fell over the valley, Jake Morrison and Ayanna held each other close, both sensing that their brief happiness was about to be shattered forever. The cabin that had seemed like a sanctuary now felt like a trap, isolated and vulnerable in the vast wilderness. Through the windows, they could see the distant glow of signal fires being lit on the surrounding peaks, a network of flame that would soon bring death to their doorstep. Ayanna wept silently for the cousin she had loved, while Jake Morrison cleaned his weapons and prepared for a battle he knew he could not win. The marriage that was supposed to bring peace had instead lit the fuse that would explode into the bloodiest conflict the territory had ever seen. The first grey light of dawn revealed a sight that would haunt Jake Morrison's nightmares for the rest of his days, if he lived to have any. 200 Apache warriors had materialized from the darkness like vengeful spirits, their painted faces and eagle feathers catching the early morning light. They sat motionless on their horses in perfect silence, forming a complete circle around the cabin with the discipline of a military force. War Chief Nalnish rode at their head, his weathered face a mask of granite, while beside him sat the medicine man Bidzi, whose presence meant this was not just a raid, but a sacred judgment. The morning mist swirled around the horse's legs, giving the entire scene an otherworldly quality that made Jake Morrison wonder if he was still dreaming. From inside the cabin, Ayanna watched her father's arrival with a heart torn between love and terror. She could see the pain in Nalnish's eyes even at this distance, the weight of a decision that went against every paternal instinct he possessed. Behind him, she recognized the faces of warriors who had bounced her on their knees as a child, men who had taught her to ride and hunt, and who now came seeking her husband's blood. The silence was more terrifying than any war cry could have been, speaking of a resolve that had moved beyond anger into something far more dangerous. She pressed her face against Jake Morrison's shoulder, feeling his heart beating like a war drum against her cheek. Jake Morrison stepped onto his porch with his hands clearly visible, showing respect for Apache customs even in this moment of ultimate confrontation. His rifle remained inside, a gesture that spoke of either courage or resignation, perhaps both. The morning air was crisp with the promise of autumn, and somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark sang its liquid song, oblivious to the human drama unfolding below. The cowboy's voice carried clearly in the still air as he spoke in his carefully learned Apache, acknowledging War Chief Nalnish's authority and requesting the right to speak. The old chief's slight nod was the only response, but it was enough to keep 200 warriors from unleashing their fury. The words that followed would be remembered and repeated around Apache fires for generations to come. Jake Morrison spoke not as a white man defending his property, but as a husband fighting for his wife and the dream they had tried to build together. He told of his respect for Apache ways, of his willingness to live by their laws and honor their customs. His voice grew stronger as he spoke of his love for Ayanna, a love that had driven him to risk everything by entering their territory alone and unarmed. The warriors listened in grudging silence, some moved despite themselves by the sincerity in his voice, but the blood of Tarek still cried out for vengeance, and words alone might not be enough to satisfy the demands of Apache justice. War Chief Nalnish finally spoke, his voice carrying the weight of mountains and the wisdom of countless seasons. He acknowledged Jake Morrison's courage and the legitimacy of the marriage bond, but he also spoke of the blood debt that now existed between them. The death of Tarek, regardless of the circumstances, demanded satisfaction according to the ancient laws that governed Apache society. The old chief's proposal was both merciful and terrible, trial by combat, with Jake Morrison facing 3 of their best warriors in succession. Victory would mean acceptance into the tribe and an end to hostilities. Defeat would mean death, but an honorable death that would allow Ayana to remarry according to Apache custom. The morning sun climbed higher as the ultimatum hung in the air like smoke. Ayana's cry of anguish cut through the morning like a knife blade, her voice carrying all the pain of a woman watching her world tear itself apart. She burst from the cabin despite Jake Morrison's attempts to restrain her, running to her father's horse and grasping his stirrup with desperate hands. Her words tumbled out in rapid Apache, a mixture of pleading and commanding that showed the daughter of a war chief beneath the grieving wife. She offered herself as substitute, proposing to return to her people if they would spare her husband's life. But Nalnish's face remained unmoved, though tears glistened in his dark eyes. Honor and law demanded blood, and not even a father's love could change that fundamental truth. The first warrior to face Jake Morrison was Kitchi, a veteran of many battles whose scars told the story of a lifetime spent defending his people. The combat was to be with traditional weapons, tomahawk and knife, while the circle of warriors watched in absolute silence. The clash of steel on steel rang across the valley as the 2 men fought with the skill of seasoned fighters, each looking for the opening that would end the battle. Jake Morrison's frontier experience served him well, but Kitchi's knowledge of Apache fighting techniques pushed the cowboy to his limits. Blood flowed from wounds on both men, staining the morning ground red. When Kitchi finally fell, it was with the respect of a warrior for a worthy opponent, his dying words acknowledging Jake Morrison's courage. The second combat was against Yazzie, a younger warrior whose speed and agility made him dangerous as a striking rattlesnake. This fight ranged across the yard and into the corral, with both men using every advantage the terrain offered. Jake Morrison's shirt was torn and bloodied, his breath coming in ragged gasps as exhaustion began to take its toll. But desperation gave him strength, and the knowledge that Ayana's future depended on his success drove him beyond normal human endurance. When Yazzie's knife found its mark, opening a gash across the cowboy's ribs, it seemed the fight might be over. But Jake Morrison's return stroke caught the Apache warrior in the throat, ending the battle with shocking suddenness. 2 down, 1 to go, but the cowboy's strength was failing fast. The final warrior was Nayeli, War Chief Nalnish's own nephew, a man whose skill with blade and tomahawk was legendary throughout Apache territory. He was fresh while Jake Morrison was bleeding and exhausted, the odds stacked heavily in the Apache's favor. But as the 2 men circled each other in the growing morning light, something had changed in the watching warriors. They had seen the white man fight with honor, showing respect for their fallen enemies and conducting himself according to Apache law. Win or lose, Jake Morrison had proven himself worthy of their respect. The final battle was fierce but brief, ending when both men fell together, their weapons piercing each other simultaneously. In the sudden silence, only their labored breathing could be heard. As Jake Morrison and Nayeli struggled to their feet, both wounded but neither defeated, War Chief Nalnish raised his hand and spoke the words that would end the confrontation. The debt of blood had been paid through courage and honor, and the white man had proven himself a true Apache warrior. The circle of mounted fighters began to disperse as the old chief dismounted and walked to where his daughter knelt beside her husband, binding his wounds with strips torn from her dress. His weathered hands touched both their heads in blessing, and his words carried the authority of generations. They were truly married now, united not just by ceremony, but by blood and battle. As the warriors rode away into the morning mist, Jake Morrison and Ayana held each other close, survivors of a trial that had tested not just their love, but the very possibility of peace between 2 worlds. The cabin in the valley would become a symbol of hope, a place where different peoples could learn to live together if they had the courage to try.